Hey y'all, Zach McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and this is my Seattle housing market watch for October 14th, 2025. Well, last week we finished up our monthly market updates. So if you haven't seen those yet, those are our updates where we're talking about the stats from the previous month. So we talked about King County stats, we talked about Snohomish County stats, and we talked about the Seattle and Bellevue specific stats in 3 different updates. And these updates, if you're new to the channel, are our recap of the last week. So we look at the King and Snohomish County inventory changes over the last week. And then we will specifically talk about the under contract King and Snohomish County stats towards the end, and we'll look at what homes we're selling for over the past week. And we'll look at what houses we're receiving as far as multiple offers or contingencies in contracts. And I'll give clarity here as we go through about those timeframes. Sometimes those timeframes are different. Every single week when we look at the Market Watch stats, we're looking at the previous week. So we're looking at the 7th of October through the 14th of October here for the King and Snohomish County inventory look here. And as we're jumping into this, we're seeing about 60 fewer listings this last week versus when we did this on the last week of September, a couple weeks back. 663 new listings versus 720 new listings. And every single year, we see a trail off in the new listings, usually around mid to end of October. September is usually the final push, and usually even more new listings than in August. Now, as we're looking at the data, we're starting to see that trickle off happening now. We're starting to see fewer listings coming on the market. We're still seeing a lot of price reductions, 611 price reductions, almost the same as the new listings, right? So we've been talking about this for a while too. There's a lot of houses sitting on the market, taking longer to sell. 30 days on market's pretty normal right now. We're seeing the amount of pending sales start to slow a tiny bit, 737 versus 817 when we looked at this number a couple weeks back, end of September. A lot of that can be attributed to the fact that we have fewer listings, right? So some of the houses that are sitting on the market for reasons, right? It could be the price. It could also be something about the house that makes it less desirable than others. And usually those houses end up selling for quite a bit less in order to get them sold, right? You have to entice the buyer to want to make that purchase. But the trend overall is towards less inventory. And I think end of September was kind of our peak for the fall inventory. And when we look back at October's numbers in a few weeks, I suspect that we're going to see that those supply numbers that we talk about will continue to shrink as we're heading towards the winter housing market, which usually has very little housing available. And so right now is still an opportunity to see lots of houses. If you're a buyer, kind of pick and choose from what's out there. It's going to start to change here in the coming weeks and become increasingly more difficult as far as the choices, right? The selection's going to dwindle. Now, let's look at the mortgage rates here real quick, and then we're going to talk specifically about the King County and the Snohomish County inventory and stats here. Now, mortgage rates were a couple weeks back, 6.37%. According to Mortgage News Daily survey, things haven't changed much over the past few weeks, but they are down slightly. 6.31 was the number today on Mortgage News Daily's website. And the lower interest rates have certainly helped keep the housing market moving, but it hasn't changed things too dramatically yet. The mortgage rates aren't significantly down, and the market hasn't significantly changed either. It was almost more competitive when rates were a little higher and there was less inventory than it is now. In fact, that's the truth. In the spring, when mortgage rates were higher, we did see more competition. A lot of that has to do with the amount of supply versus the demand for housing than it does the mortgage rates. And the supply numbers really have kept the housing market a lot more stable here than other markets, because we did see a big dip right after interest rates started going up. But even by the time they reached their peak, the interest rates, when they were getting up towards 8% and even a little over, we were already seeing the housing market rebounding, right? The dip happened when rates were approaching those numbers, but the amount of inventory shrunk up too. So people that wanted to buy houses didn't have a lot to choose from. They were competing with people, and it kept the prices relatively stable. And in fact, housing prices are very close to, if not higher in some areas than they were back in 2022 when the housing market dipped after interest rates started rising. But we've been seeing interest rates trending down now over the past few months. And that's certainly bringing some interest back to the housing market. But we're also heading into the fall and the winter market. So it's just things are starting to shift, it feels like. But at the same time, we're heading into a season where it does tend to slow down, at least as far as the listing activity goes. And let's look at King County, though. As we're looking at King County, we're seeing that the median sales price over the past 2 weeks. So we're looking back at October 1st to the 14th. That's our snapshot right here. So the past 2 weeks in King County, $910,000. And when we look back at the end of September, we were seeing $937 was the median sales price. Again, this is more just an FYI, but we also are always looking at these numbers as a whole at the end of the month. So last month, end of September for the whole month, $975 was the median sales price in King County. So higher than both of these numbers, $975. There are certain weeks where you're going to see higher numbers, and then we look at all those numbers for the month on our monthly market updates. The percentage of the list price still right around 99%, which just means that houses tend to sell pretty close to their asking price, but there are certainly some houses selling a little above, some selling below. And a stat that we talk about in the monthly market update is the percentage of the original asking price, because when people do a price reduction, these numbers are reflecting the price reduction minus versus the original asking price minus. And so it's actually a little bit less if we were to take into account the original asking price here in King County. Pendings with multiple offers, right? What's the competition look like? 24% of all the offers in King County had multiple offers. And that's been relatively consistent here recently as things have picked up a tiny bit. 28% when we did the numbers at the end of September. We're looking at a 2-week snapshot here. Reminder, pendings with escalation addendums, 10% of all the offers had that escalation addendum. When we looked at the end of September, we had 12% of all the offers with an escalation addendum. Pretty similar here. And then the pendings with financing addendums and inspection addendums, we're seeing tiny bit more financing addendums. 72% had the financing addendum. And I try to say that 5 times fast, by the way. I don't think I can. Pendings with inspection addendums, 45% versus 42%. So a little bit more contingencies added into the contract in King County, a little tiny bit fewer multiple offer scenarios, and also the escalation. So nothing substantial here. Again, the week over week or couple week snapshots aren't giving us the whole picture, but it does show us that we're seeing a little slowdown in the buyer competition. I felt that a little bit too in the marketplace. We've, in Snohomish County, seen an interesting thing. We actually saw houses sell over asking price on average in Snohomish County in the past 2 weeks, 102% of asking price. So something a little different than we were seeing in King County. We saw 99% of asking price when we looked at this number a couple weeks back. So over the last 2 weeks, a little bit of an uptick there, just a little bit more of the, I would say, larger, probably, amounts over asking price. Median sales price was $749,000 in Snohomish County over the past 2 weeks. The pending situation with multiple offers was the same as the end of September. 21% with multiple offers. We saw the same. We saw 6% having that escalation addendum, 8% at the end of September. Interesting, though, that the amount over asking price is significantly more, even though we saw fewer of those escalations, right? So it just means people were more aggressive in some specific scenarios. But across the board, more financing addendums, 5% more had financing addendums over the past 2 weeks than the end of September, 81% versus 76%. And then the pendings with inspection addendums, we saw 51% at the end of September. And then the last 2 weeks, 48% had the inspection addendums. So overall, a little less competitive in general in Snohomish County than in King County. But at the same time, we saw more of those multiple offer scenarios push the prices up in Snohomish County. And I think to wrap this up today, just pointing out that we are heading into the middle of the fall. We're heading into the winter months coming up soon. We're approaching the time when the amount of houses coming on the market just falls off a cliff. And the next couple weeks is going to be the last period of time where we have the amount of supply that we have compared to the buyers. All the buyers aren't going to disappear during the holidays. It's definitely a more difficult time to buy a house during the holidays because people are traveling and fewer people want to list their house because of the holidays and gatherings and things like that. So it does shift how the market is behaving, and that's a seasonal thing. We're going to see the amount of listings pick back up again, but whether it's the travel or the weather, we are going to see a lot fewer listings, and that does mean that the buyers are going to have a lot less to choose from, and it does mean we're going to start to have a little bit more competition as the year wraps up, or at least as we head into 2026. Thanks so much for watching this week's Seattle Housing Market Watch. If you made it to the end, I know that there was some value here for you, so please consider subscribing to the channel to follow along and see more videos like this. And if you know somebody who could benefit from this video, please consider sharing it with them so that they can also follow along with the Seattle housing market updates.